The various names used since classical times for the people known today as the Celts are of disparate origins. The name Kappa Epsilon Lambda Tau Omicron Iota Celtoire and Celta is used in Greek and Latin, respectively, as the name of a people of the Latine horizon in the region of the Upper Rhine and Danube during the 6th to 1st centuries BC in Greco-Roman ethnography. The etymology of this name and that of the Gauls Gamma Alpha Lambda Alpha Tau Alpha Iota Galatii Galli is of uncertain etymology. The name of the Welsh, on the other hand, is taken from the designator used by the Germanic peoples for Celtic and Latin-speaking peoples, *wala, meaning foreign. The linguistic sense of the name Celts, grouping all speakers of Celtic languages, is modern. In particular, aside from a 1st-century literary genealogy of Celtis, the grandson of Britannos by Heracles, there is no record of the term Celt being used in connection with the insular Celts, the inhabitants of the British Isles during the Iron Age. Prior to the 17th century, Celts, Celta, the first recorded use of the name of Celts, as Kappa Epsilon Lambda Tau Omicron Iota to refer to an ethnic group was by Hecataeus of Miletus, the Greek geographer, in 517 BC, when writing about a people living near Massilia. In the 5th century BC, Herodotus referred to Celtoire living around the head of the Danube and also in the far west of Europe. The etymology of the term Celtoire is unclear. Possible roots include Indo-European *kl to hide, i.e. *kl to heat, or *kel to impel. Several authors have supposed it to be Celtic in origin, while others view it as a name coined by Greeks. Linguist Patricia de Bernardo Stempel falls in the latter group, and suggests the meaning, the tall ones. The Romans preferred the name Gauls for those Celts whom they first encountered in northern Italy. In the 1st century BC, Caesar referred to the Gauls as calling themselves Celts in their own tongue. According to the 1st century poet Parthenius of Nicaea, Celtus was the son of Heracles and Celtina, the daughter of Britannis. This literary genealogy exists nowhere else and was not connected with any known cult. Celtus became the eponymous ancestor of Celts. In Latin, Celta came in turn from Herodotus, a word for the Gauls, Celtoire. The Romans used Celta to refer to continental Gauls, but apparently not to insular Celts. The latter are divided linguistically into Goidels and Brythons. The name Celtiberi is used by Diodorus Siculus in the 1st century BC, of a people which he considered a mixture of Celta and Iberi. Celtici, aside from the Celtiberians, Lusanese, Titi, Aravaci and Pelendonese among others, who inhabited large regions of central Spain. Greek and Roman geographers also spoke of a people or group of peoples called Celtici or Kappa Epsilon Lambda Tau Iota Kappa Omicron Iota, living in the south of modern-day Portugal, in the Alentejo region, between the Tagus and the Guadiana rivers. They are first mentioned by Strabo, who wrote that they were the most numerous people inhabiting that region. Later, the description of Ptolemy shows a more reduced territory, comprising the regions from Evora to Setúbal, being the coastal and southern areas occupied by the Turdetani. A second group of Celtici was mentioned by Pliny living in the region of Batruria. He considered that they proceeded of the Celtiberians from the Lusitania, because of their religion, language, and because of the names of their cities. In the north, in Galicia, another group of Celtici dwelt the coastal areas. They comprised several populi, including the Celtici proper, the Praestamacii south of the Tambre River, the Supertamacii north of it, and the Neri by the Celtic promontory. Pomponius Mela affirmed that all the inhabitants of the coastal regions, from the bays of southern Galicia until the Astures, were also Celtici. All is inhabited by the Celtici, except from the Douro River to the bays, where the Grovi dwelt in the north coast. First there are the Artabri, still of the Celtic people, and after them the Astures. He also mentioned the fabulous Isles of Tin, the Cassiterides, as situated among these Celtici. The Celtici Supertarmaci have also left a number of inscriptions, as the Celtici Flavienses did. Several villages and rural parishes still bear the name Celtigos in Galicia. This is also the name of an archpriesthood of the Catholic Church, a division of the Archbishopric of Santiago de Compostela, encompassing part of the lands attributed to the Celtici Supertarmaci by ancient authors. Introduction. In early modern literature, the name of the Celta is revived in the learned literature of the early modern period. The French Celtique and the German Keltisch appear in the 16th century. The English word Celts is first attested in 1607. The adjective Celtic, formed after French Celtique, appears a little later, in the mid-17th century. An early attestation is found in Milton's Paradise Lost, in reference to the insular Celts of antiquity, the Ionian gods, who, o'er the Celtic fields, roamed the utmost isles. Use of Celtic in the linguistic sense arises in the 18th century, in the work of Edward Lhuyd. The antiquarian William Stukeley pictured a race of ancient Britons, constructing the temples of the ancient Celts, such as Stonehenge, before he decided in 1733 to recast the Celts, in his book as Druids. The Ossian fables written by James Macpherson, portrayed as ancient Scottish Gaelic poems, added to this romantic enthusiasm. The Irish revival came after the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829 as a conscious attempt to demonstrate an Irish national identity, and with its counterpart in other countries subsequently became known as the Celtic Revival. Pronunciation. The initial consonant of the English words Celt and Celtic can be realized either as k or per second, both variants being recognized by modern dictionaries. A minor spelling variant Celtic exists, for which k is the only pronunciation. The English word originates in the 17th century, taken from the Celta of Classical Latin. Until the mid-19th century, the sole pronunciation in English was Celt, in keeping of the treatment of the letter C inherited by Middle English from Old French and Late Latin. Beginning in the mid-19th century, Celtic revivalist and nationalist publications advocated imitating the pronunciation of Classical Latin in the time of Julius Caesar, when Latin Celta was pronounced Celte. An early example of this is a short article in a November 1857 issue of the Celt, a publication of the Irish Celtic Union. Of all the nations that have hitherto lived on the face of the earth, the English have the worst mode of pronouncing learned languages. This is admitted by the whole human race. This poor, meagre, sordid language resembles nothing so much as the hissing of serpents or geese. The distinction which English writers are too stupid to notice, but which the Irish grammarians are perpetually talking of, the distinction between broad and narrow vowels, governs the English language. If we follow the unwritten law of the English, we shall pronounce Celt, but Caesar would pronounce it Celt. Thus the reader may take which pronunciation he pleases. He may follow the rule of the Latin or the rule of the English language, and in either case be right. A Guide to English Pronunciation for Welsh Speakers, published in 1861, gives the alternative pronunciations Celtic, Celtic, for the adjective Celtic. The pronunciation with per second remained standard throughout the 19th to early 20th century. But the variant with k seems to have gained ground during the later 20th century, especially among students of Celtic culture. On the other hand, the per second pronunciation remains the most recognized form when it occurs in the names of sports teams, most notably Celtic Football Club and the Boston Celtics basketball team. The corresponding words in French are pronounced with per second, and English Celtic was formed in imitation of French Celtique. The corresponding German terms are Kelten and Keltisch, not only pronounced as k, but even spelled with k. This is a regular German treatment of names in Greek Kappa, also observed in cases such Cimbri, Cimmerians, Cambyses, etc. These speakings with k arise in the later 18th century. From the 16th to the early 18th century, the prevalent speaking in German was Celtish. The Celt, a stone tool, has a completely separate etymology from Celt and Celtic. In English its sole pronunciation is SLT. Modern uses in current usage the terms Celt and Celtic can take several senses depending on context. The Celts of the European Iron Age, the group of Celtic-speaking peoples in historical linguistics, and the modern Celtic identity derived from the Romanticist Celtic revival. Linguistic context after its use by Edward Lhuyd in 1707. The use of the word Celtic as an umbrella term for the pre-Roman peoples of the British Isles gained considerable popularity. Lhuyd was the first to recognise that the Irish, British and Gaulish languages were related to one another, and the inclusion of the insular Celts under the term Celtic from this time expresses this linguistic relationship. By the late 18th century, the Celtic languages were recognized as one branch within the larger Indo-European family. Historiographical context: the Celts are an ethno-linguistic group of Iron Age European peoples, including the Gauls, the Celtiberians and the insular Celts. The timeline of Celtic settlement in the British Isles is unclear and the object of much speculation, but it is clear that by the 1st century BC, most of Great Britain and Ireland was inhabited by Celtic-speaking peoples now known as the Insular Celts, divided into two large groups, Brythonic or P-Celtic, and Goidelic or Q-Celtic. The Brythonic groups under Roman rule were known in Latin as Britanni, while use of the name Celta or Galatae was restricted to the Gauls. There are no specimens of Goidelic languages prior to the appearance of primitive Irish inscriptions in the 4th century AD. However, there are earlier references to the Ivani, and by 314, to the Scotta. Simon James argues that, while the term Celtic expresses a valid linguistic connection, its use of both insular and continental Celtic culture is misleading, as archaeology does not suggest a unified Celtic culture during the Iron Age. Modern context: with the rise of Celtic nationalism in the early to mid-19th century, the term Celtic also came to be a self-designation used by proponents of a modern Celtic identity. Thus, the contributor to the Celt discussing the word Celt states, "The Greeks called us Celtois," expressing a position of ethnic essentialism that extends the first-person pronoun to include both 19th-century Irishmen and the Danubian Kappa Epsilon Lambda Tau Omicron Iota of Herodotus. This sense of Celtic is preserved in its political sense in Celtic nationalism of organizations such as the Celtic League, but it is also used in a more general and political sense, in expressions such as Celtic music. Galli, Galatae. Latin Galli might be from an originally Celtic ethnic or tribal name, perhaps borrowed into Latin during the early 5th century BC Celtic expansions into Italy. Its root may be the common Celtic *galno, meaning power or strength. The Greek gamma alpha lambda alpha tau alpha iota Galatae seems to be based on the same root, borrowed directly from the same hypothetical Celtic source which gave us Galli. Schumacher's account is slightly different. He states that Galli is derived from the present stem of the verb which he reconstructs for Proto-Celtic is *galnv, whose meaning he gives as to be able to gain control of, while Galatae comes from the same root and is to be reconstructed as nominative singular *Galatius less than *gelts. He gives the same meaning for both reconstructs, namely, makthaba, potentate, ruler, or alternatively, plunderer, rauber, raider, looter, pillager, marauder, and points out that both names can be exonyms in order to explain the pejorative meaning. The Proto-Indo-European verbal root in question is reconstructed by Schumacher as *gel, whose meaning is given as macht bekommen über, to acquire power over, in the Lexikon der Indogermanischen Verben. Gaul, Gaulish, Welsh. The English Gaul and French Gaul, Gaulois are unrelated to Latin Gallia and Galli, despite superficial similarity. They are rather derived from the Germanic term Waller, foreigner, Romanized person, an exonym applied by Germanic speakers to Celts, likely via a Latinization of Frankish *Walholland, Gaul, literally, land of the foreigners, Romans, making it partially cognate with the names Wales and Wallachia, the usual word for the non-Germanic speaking peoples. The Germanic W is regularly rendered as G in French, and the diphthong O is the regular outcome of L before a following consonant. Gaul or Gaul can hardly be derived from Latin Gallia, since G would become J before A, and the diphthong O would be unexplained. The regular outcome of Latin Gallia is J in French, which is found in several Western place names. The French term for Welsh is Gallois, which is, however, not derived from the Latin Galli, but, like Gaulois, borrowed from Germanic *Walhiska, Celtic, Gallo-Roman, Romance, or its Old English descendant Walisk. The English form Gaul and Gaulish come from the French Gaul and Gaulois, which translate Latin Gallia and Gallus, ICUs, respectively. In Old French, the words Gallus, Gallois, Wallois had different meanings. Welsh or the lang the oil, etc. On the other hand, the word wall is recorded for the first time in the 13th century to translate the Latin word Gallia, while Gaulois is recorded for the first time in the 15th century, and the scholars use it to translate the Latin words Gallus, Gallicus. The word comes from Proto-Germanic *Waller. The English word Welsh originates from the word Walisk, the Anglo-Saxon form of *Walhiska. The reconstructed Proto-Germanic word for foreign or Celt, Celtic speaker, French speaker, Italian speaker, Old Norse, Valskai, place. Valia, Gaulish, French, that is supposed to be derived of the name of the Volcae, a Celtic tribe who lived first in the south of Germany and emigrated then to Gaul. The Germanic term may ultimately have a Celtic source. It is possibly the result of a loan of the Celtic tribal name Volcae into pre-Germanic *, changing according to Grimm's law to yield Proto-Germanic *walh. The Volcae were one of the Celtic peoples who for 2 centuries barred the southward expansion of the Germanic tribes on the line of the Harz Mountains and into Saxony and Silesia. In the Middle Ages, territories with primarily Romance-speaking populations, such as France and Italy, were known in German as Welschland as opposed to Deutschland, and the word is cognate with Vlach and Walloon as well as with the Wall in Cornwall. Other examples are the surnames Wallis and Walsh. During the early Germanic period, the term seems to have been applied to the peasant population of the Roman Empire, most of whom were in the areas immediately settled by the Germanic people. The term Gael is, despite superficial similarity, also completely unrelated to Galli. See Gale's #terminology. Britannia. The Celtic-speaking people of Great Britain were known as Britanni or Britons in Latin and as Beta Rho Iota Tau Tau Omega Nu Epsilon Sigma in Greek. An earlier form was Prytani, or Pi Rho Epsilon Tau Alpha Nu Omicron Iota in Greek. Related to this is *Prytani, the reconstructed self-designation of the people later known as Picts, which is recorded later in Old Irish as Cruthyn and Welsh as Pryden.